Dr. Heilige Mishnah. Kasav l'shum malchus she'ein hagedes. You wrote a get, and the date on the get had the date based on the improper malchus, which the Gemara is going to explain is referring to the malchus of Rome. And the takana is that in a get, the date has to be a date that's according to the current melech, or l'shum malchus modai, which is not the current melech in the time of the Mishnah, or l'shum malchus yavam. These were already malchusin that were no longer in existence, or levinia bayis, no malchus at all. You're counting from the years of the Beis Hamikdash being built, l'chover bayis, or hay b'mizrach v'chasav b'marav. If he was in the Mizrach, he wrote the marav v'chasav b'mizrach. The get is possible, and therefore, if she remarries based on this get, it's as if she was mizanatakas baila, and therefore teitzei mizeh umizeh. She's also to her first husband. She's also to her second husband. Which get mizeh umizeh. She needs to get from both, and that's going to be midarvana. Ve'ein lo like suba v'loy peiros v'loy mezoinos v'loy belois lo alzeh v'loy alzeh. She doesn't get the benefits, any of the benefits that a wife gets from a husband. She doesn't get any of them from either husband. As a knas, we literally throw the book at her. Im not le mizeh umizeh tachsir v'avlad mamzer. I'm sorry. Im not le mizeh tachsir comma. Even if she got some of those benefits, she has to give it back. Of course, midrabanon. Neither one can be metama for her, which was also an interesting point. That it's primarily negeya if her husband's a kohen and she dies, her husband's not allowed to be metama for her. But let's think about it. If her first husband was a kohen and she was a regular kosher woman, so he's not allowed to be with time with her. Her second husband, even if it was a good get, her second husband couldn't have married her because she was a gerusha, right? At best, she's a gerusha. So there are those who learn that the second husband maybe wasn't a gerusha, it wasn't a kohen. Maybe the second husband was a nazir. They don't have any schusim in here either. And so the Mishnah is talking about somebody who is remarrying with apostle again. There's actually a story, a horrific story, but a story, nevertheless, a true story, where there was a shidduch that was done, and the couple got married. By the chasna, they both had, I believe, great grandparents, and both sets of great grandparents from the kala side and from the chasna side were schmoozing. And it turned out that they were in the same concentration camp. They both were in the war, and they both were in the concentration camp, and they were both in the same concentration camp. And as they got talking, they realized that they were right near each other. And the great grandmother of the chassan with the great grandfather of the kala looked at each other's arms, and they were one digit apart. Their numbers were one digit apart. And then they remembered that they were once husband and wife, and they lost each other during the war, and they got a heter to remarry, and they were really married. Which means all of the children and grandchildren are mamzerim. So this shaila went to Rabbi Yashid. It was known that every aguna that of Moshe was matir, no husband ever came back. But this here it did. This wasn't Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe wasn't matir them, and there was a whole big shaila. What if they're a little senile? What if the children think they're senile? What if they're not trusted? Maybe then they don't have a din of mamzerim, but it was a very not happy ending story. Okay. Bas Levi min ha-meiser. If this woman was a daughter of a Levi, then she has a knas that she doesn't eat meiser anymore, because it doesn't say anywhere that a girl who doesn't have perfect use can eat meiser. Bas kohen min ha-truma. If she's a bas kohen and she is in this situation, she would no longer be able to eat truma. We had it in Soita. It says v'nitma 3 times. One to tell us that she's also a baal, one to tell us that she's also a boil, or one to tell us that she may no longer eat truma. Vein Yorshin Shozeh, Yorshin Shozeh, Yorshin Ksubas. Neither Yorshim or Yarshin or Ksuba. Which the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean they don't Yarshin her Ksuba? We just said she doesn't get Ksuba. So there is no Ksuba to Yarshin. And the Gemara answers, in Yavamis the Gemara answers, that we're talking about Ksubas B'Nindichrid. The halacha is that if she comes into the marriage with children, and the husband maybe would remarry, he has his own children, her father won't want to give a nadin. What's going to end up happening is if she dies and her children die, all of her money is going to go. All the money that she brought into the marriage will go to someone else's children. She doesn't. Her father doesn't want that. So they make a ksubas b'nedichrin that no matter what happens, no matter who dies first, this money is earmarked only to the children of this woman or to the grandchildren of this guy giving the nad. So that's what it's referring to, is that they don't get a ksuba. The imesu, and if imesu, and if the either one of the husbands die, there's no chiyav yibum, even though she might be married. We don't allow it. We only allow chalitz. Shina shemoi ushema. What if what they modified in the get wasn't one of the things we just discussed? Rather, they didn't write his name or her name properly. And Tosfos tells us right off the bat that it doesn't mean Loishina Mamish. It's not completely a different name. Ella, it means that he had two different names, and he didn't use all the names that he could have used, or Shem Ira, Shem Ira. And again, Tosfos says, Loishina Mamish, Al Sheyesh La Isa Ir Shnei Shemosh Shnei Mekoymos. It was called different things in different places, and you didn't mention them all. The halacha is Teitzei Mizeh Umizeh V'chol Adrachim Ha'elu Ba, and all of these sanctions exist. There's an important Tosfos that discusses this and discusses how detailed that has to be. So Tosfos says, Omer Yitzchak Dafke Ir Shadorim Ba. There's only a problem if they don't record properly the city that they currently live in. Avol Ir Shenoilad Ba. Apparently, sometimes they used to write this city that each of this couple were born in, I guess, to give extra identification. As Tosfos says later, just in case there's two people in the city with the same name, where the person was born will also further clarify who this person is. So, Avol Ir Shenoil Ba Afilu Shina Kosher. But if he just wrote the wrong city where he was born in, that would be kosher. Kivan shein tzarich l'koisvay klal. Since you don't need to write that at all, and we don't write in our Gittin the city that each of these parties were born in. Shakad moinim shehegir l'koisvay is mishum she'im yeresh sheyesh sham Yosef min shemin acher, to someone else with the same name. Yibay siminai de makam leida. You would use that as an extra level of clarification. But since you don't have to write that, if you wrote that wrong, that wouldn't be a problem at all. V'teida. Often it is written in the get. If it would be possible, if it would be the wrong name, if it would be the wrong city of birth was listed in the get, that would possible the get, then the Rabbanan wouldn't let you write anything in the get. Why put extra information in the get that could lead to becoming possible? Unless there were Adam there. That could tell us for sure that this is where he came from. Okay. And then there's a whole shaila how this applies to other stars as well. Okay. The Ri was materit. They would leave it out. Okay. So there's a shaila. If you do have, if you don't have, we don't put any type of information on where each of the parties were born. Zok the Mishnah Vaitim. Kol harai shamru tzarasein mutaris. What is the halacha? The very first Mishnah of Yavamis. It says that if a man had more than one wife, and one of the wives that he had is an erva to his brother, and therefore, if he would die without children, his brother wouldn't be able to do yibum to one of his wives. Automatically, the brother doesn't have to yibum to any other wives because she patters all of her tzaras. Well, what would happen if, in fact, she was an erva to the deceased brother? Therefore, yibum couldn't be done on her. Now all of her co-wives walk free without any need to do yibum or chalitza, and therefore holchu atzaras ha'elu v'nisu. And they all remarried other men. They were widows. They married other men. They weren't zokuk liyibum because one of their co-wives was a tzaras erva. And then v'nimtzu elu islands. And now it turned out that that co-wife, who was an erva, was an islandess. Kum to chois l'mafreya. She was never really married to the deceased, which means that now these women who remarried other men are really zokuk yibum, and they married without getting chalitza. So the halach is teite mizeh u'mizeh. They have the same issue. Now they ended up being like a nation shishinza. The problem is a woman who remarries without yibum or znus is not over a chayve krisos. It's only a lav of l'sia isha mesa chutza. So why does it make her children into mamzerim? So Rashi says this only works according to Rabbi Akiva, who holds that there is a mamzer even from chayve lavan would create a mamzer. Okay, how about a kohen to shivimtoi? Someone actually made yibum. There's multiple wives, and he made yibum on one of the wives. The halcha tzarasav, and this is lacher. Since one of the co-wives did yibum, it now frees all the other wives, and they go marry other people. The nimtza zusha haisa islanders, and now it turns out that the woman who the brother-in-law did yibum with was an islandess, so her marriage was never a marriage. And therefore her yibum is not a yibum. And therefore this woman who thinks that her co-wife did yibum and patted her and allowed her to marry out, that all was a farce. And now she's mukhib in yibum. So the same thing, she found herself having remarried without the head of her yibum. The Gemara is going to explain why we need two variations of a woman of the same case, of a woman who thought she could marry and then she found out afterwards that she really zakuk yibum. How about Kasav Sefer Get Leish? Here you have a Sefer who's a little bit of a shlamazim. What happened was both the get and the receipt for the ksuba was written by the same Sefer. So he has two documents. And what he's supposed to do, he's supposed to give the get to the husband. He's supposed to give the receipt to the wife. And then the husband will give the woman the get. The woman will give the husband the receipt that she got paid her ksuba once it's paid. And then everyone has what they need. Well, what happens if after the gerushin, they go home and they open up their ksuba, they open up their scroll, and the husband finds that he still has the get, which means he must have been given the shiver to give to her. He was never given the get, so he was given the wrong document. So because of shiver get lish, shiver lisha, and he made a huge mistake. The nosan get leisha, he gave the get to the woman when he should have given it to the man. The shiver she gave the receipt to the man when he should have given it to the woman. But and they exchanged documents. And then after a time, which the Gemara will tell us how long the time is, they open up, they see their documents, and it's the husband who has the get, meaning he originally was given the shiver, and he only gave a shiver to his wife. And the woman has a shiver. She was the one who gave her husband the get. So she was a nation shish. She never received the get. Rabbi Elazar says, Im la'alter yetze. Im la'alter yatza, if right away, and we'll have to see what right away means, they discover that this was a mistake, then the halach is ain't a get. It's not going to be a get, because clearly he didn't give her a get, he gave her a shiver. But im la'chazman yatza, if they didn't check right away, maybe they checked later, and we'll see what later means. Maybe hareza get. Maybe it really is a good get, and maybe we'll say, because let's just for example say that she remarried already. If they only discover this horrific mistake after she remarried, then maybe the whole thing is a hoax. Maybe really she received the get, and what they did was clandestinely they swapped documents so that they could make it look like there was never a get, so that the second husband will get messed up and he'll get his wife back. Loi kol heimenu min arishain la'abetz chushel shel shem. They're not believed as a couple at this point to say that there wasn't really a get and to mess up the second husband who married this woman based on that get. And the Gemara is going to elaborate on that. But let's say Rashi, we don't necessarily believe this couple that their documents were swapped to the detriment of the second husband Shanasa based on the assumption that she was divorced. Darminan will say they actually together, her and her first husband made a scam so that she can get out of her second husband and go back to her first. That obviously doesn't work because she remains also to both of them. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. My malchus sheina against. Which malchus are we talking about? That's not a proper malchus. Zok the Gemara malchus harabim. The malchus of Rome, the Roman Empire, was a malchus sheina against. Amai karila malchus sheina against. They didn't have their own writing, their own alphabet, and they didn't even have their own language. They adopted the language of the people that they were in, and therefore they're not even a legitimate. They don't even have a legitimate language and a legitimate alphabet, and therefore they refer to as malchus shein hagen. Why was it that when they decided to date Gittin, they used the date based on the years in the malchus of the current secular regime? It was because of Shalom Malchus. Rashi says, we're showing them respect so that we should have peace with them. They'll say, the Goyim will say, oh look, the Jews respect us. They use our years of our Malchus for the dates of their documents. So this whole thing is at the Kana to show respect to the empire, and because of that, the Mishalom Malchus Teitev Evad Mamzer. And if you use the wrong date, that's going to make a get puzzle because of the Kana. But the Kana, you should show respect for the Malchus, because of that you're going to make Mamzerim over here. You're exactly right. Rav Meir follows this rule, and Rashi says there's no mention of Rav Meir in our Mishnah, but our Mishnah is a Stam Mishnah, which is Rav Meir. The Amar Rav Hamnuna Mishmedu Ula Amir Hayir Rav Meir Kala Mishana Mimatbeya Shetovu Chachamim Begittin Havlad Mamzer. If you don't do things exactly the way it needs to be done, the blood is a mamzer. And the question is what is the mechanics with which the blood is a mamzer? If technically it's a good get. So there are those who say that when you were Ramana the Shliach, the Shofar to write the get, that Shlichus is bottle. That's why it's not a good get. And why is the Shlichus bottle? Because we know that anybody who is Mamana Shliach to write a get for them surely wants the get to be written 100% properly, the way Chazal set it up, and therefore if there's no Shlichus, there's no get. If there's no get, the child is a man. Why did we have to have so many lists in our Mishnah, a whole list of different Malchusim that would be illegitimate? All the Mishnah to say you didn't use the right date, but the Mishnah listed off if you use the wrong date because it was Malchus Raimi, or if you use the wrong date because it was Malchus Yavan, or why do we need so many examples of the wrong date? If it would have only said that if you write the Malchus of Rome, I would have said Mishum the Melicha. At the time of the Mishnayos, the Roman Emperor was still in power, just not in power there in Eretz Yisrael, but they were still in power. So you could appreciate how the current monarchy would be offended if you're writing the Malchus of some other foreign king instead of the Malchus of the local king in this jurisdiction. Abu Malchus Modai and Malchus Yavan, which were long out of power, so I'm not going to get insulted if you're referring to some dictatorship in past history. And therefore that wouldn't create the same hakpada by the Malchus. So therefore the Mishnah wanted to tell us that even that wrong Malchus is unacceptable. The Ashmina Malchus Modai and Malchus Yavan, mishum de malchusa, because you could still say that there's an objection from the current malchus to list any other melech. Don't show any respect to any malchus when I'm the malchus currently that you should show respect to. I will be in a bias, but if you're counting years from some other significant event, again, might have a hava. Again, it wouldn't impact him because it's not like a competition. You're using another date to count from, another significant event, another milestone, the beginning of the bias. Yashmina being the bias, the army kamat krishvachayu. Maybe that would also create resentment by the king, because it's basically they would look at it as a resurgence of nationalism, which they don't want. I will churban abayis, but if you're counting from the date of the churban, that surely shouldn't be objectionable to the current melech. The tzayruhu. That's definitely not going to create a resurgence of nationalistic pride. If anything, that's going to create despair. You would think that wouldn't be a problem, and the get would be kosher. That's why the Mishnah listed off all the different types of dates that you can use that would be inappropriate for different reasons. Nevertheless, there's an objection, and the get will be kosher. So, man, who is b'mizrach? Who are we referring to that he was b'mizrach and the get said b'mayir? If we're talking about the husband himself, right? That's exactly what the Mishnah listed earlier, that it has the wrong city. Ella lav sofer. It must be that we're talking about the sofer, because the sofer would write on the get where the get was actually written, where it was composed. They were always instructors sofer for any type of document. If you're in Shili, when you write a document, mention in the document where the document was actually written. Even though what occurred, the information that you're writing in the get about an event that occurred, it might have occurred in a different city, nevertheless, that should be recorded as well. But you should also record where the star itself was written. The memster in the Chumila b'Shili, even though the event might have occurred in Shili. Tosfos mentions a couple of important rules about Tanai. Tosfos says, first of all, Hini and Shili would have been right near each other. And it's a chiddush that even if they're so close to each other, and it's not even such a sheker, because one is in the vicinity of the other, there's still a hakpada to write the correct place where it is. Read, if you're not referring to shtaris of Gittin, rather other type of shtaris, like shtaris of Mekachamemkar, of Milva, of Mominus, in cause of Shili Bihini, it would be kosher. Mikamakam Oimari, Shein Oisin Yafa, Oisam Shuragil Lichto Ksuba, Biracheres, Shein Makam Achupa. It's not correct to write the ksuba in a city that's not where the actual wedding took place. Even though the sofer won't be available on that day to write the ksuba, so therefore you want him to write the ksuba elsewhere. Our Gemara tells us that even by other stars there should be hakpada to have the right place recorded where the star was written. Even though we're passing the Maisa that it doesn't apply to other stars, nevertheless you should be marked. Okay, Gavalti. Let's see what the Gemara says weiter. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Zu divrei Rab Meir. Our Mishnah that says that a get is puzzle merely because you didn't use the right malchus to identify the get, that's only the shita of Rab Meir. Like we said earlier, Shta Mishnah Rab Meir. The Chachamim would argue, and the Chachamim say, even if you use the date of something that's a slap in the face for the malchus, it's still a kosher again. Even if you count based on how many years the registrar's office, the registrar of property, in every city, there's a property registrar where all deeds are stored and recorded as to which property belongs to. So even if you, instead of writing the king, you wrote the second year since the registrar of properties is in his current position, which is literally a slap in the face to Big Boss. Harezu migoreshes. Zakmar hugita davik sivbei l'shem is tandarta de bashkar. Ishtadarta de bashkar was actually a more important position than just a property registrar. He was, as Rashi says, Shilton Shalbaskar. He was like the right-hand man, Adar Shalmelach. So he was basically the chief of staff of the king. So instead of writing the second year to the ruler of King Michael, he wrote the second year to the ruler of chief of staff David. So the question was, is this going to be a get possible? What is the halacha in this case? He sent him, so Rabbi sent back a psak. Afilu Reb Meir moiti. Here, even Reb Meir would agree that it's a good get. It's not considered a slap in the face to the malchus. My taima me'oisa malchusu. He is still part of the malchus. I fake Gemara umay shnomi center shabir. The property register, although a much lower level politician or responsibility, it's a much lower post, but it's still part of the administration. That's more hasam zilu l'hi mulsa. Why? Because the registrar, Rashi says, Shen Shultanas Gurumasu. That's one of the lowest levels of power in the hallways of the bureaucracy. It's a slap in the face to the king to refer to him based on some low-level backbench employee. But Rabbi Philip to Rav Avagoda. Okay. But when you're referring to his chief of staff, which is a high level, that would be honorable, or it wouldn't be such a slap in the face. It's even honorable. It will be honorable to the ruler. Amar Rab Abba, Amar Rab Huna, Amar Rab. Zu divrei Rab Meir. These are the words of Rab Meir. Now we're going to have to see soon what we're referring to with Zu divrei Rab Meir. Al v'chacham ma'imrim havlad kosher, but the chacham say the vlad is kosher. So let's stop here a second. Here it says, Al v'loikasav elo l'shem center shabir arezim mugureshes. It's mashma that she's mugureshes and lechatchila she can marry with such a star. That's what the chacham are saying. Over here we're saying havlad kosher, meaning lechatchila you wouldn't be able to get married with such a star, but if you did, the vlad would be kosher. As Rashi says, it's going on the same case as before. Toshus Grada argues and holds this is going on a different case. But Rashi learns it's referring to the same thing. Of Shalom Malchus, you used the wrong king to pick the date. Okay? Zok to Gemara, Umaydim Chachamim l'Rab Meir. The Chachamim agreed to Rab Meir that it would be a possible get. Shem Shina Shemayu Shema, Shem Ira v'Shem Ira. Those are much more serious violations. There, Shavlad Mamzer, there the Vlad will be a Mamzer. Zok to Gemara, Amar Abashi, Afana Nami Tanina. We also learned, Shina Shemayu Shema, Shem Ira v'Shem Ira, Teitze Mizeu Mizeh, V'chol Adrachama Eluba. And all of these sanctions are upon her. So Haman Katanila. Who is the author of that part of the Mishnah where it says Shina Shemayu Shema Shemir Shemira? It's separated out as a separate case, but it has exactly the same halacha as what the Tanakama says, referring to using the wrong malchus. Ilema Reb Meir, if it's Reb Meir who's the author of this second case of our Mishnah, le'arvinu v'lisninu. Why did our Mishnah separate it into two cases? They have the same halacha. It should have said Shina if you use the wrong malchus, or Shina Shemayu Shema Shemir Shemira, all have the same halacha. But it's separated into two cases. It must be a Lishmamino Rabbanon Shmamino. It must be that in the first case, it's only the Shida of Reb Meir who holds it to get possible, and therefore B'chal Adrachama Eluba. But in the second case of Shina Shemayu Shema Shemir Shemira, there everybody agrees that this is not a good get, and therefore the Vlad is a mamzer. Gavaltik. Baltic. Okay. Tosfos is an important halacha here. So let's quick into Tosfos. Zu diver of Meir of Chachamim of Lat Kosher Pirsh B'Kundish to Shalom Malchus. Rashi learned that it's also referring to Shalom Malchus, which I pointed out there's a little bit of a difficulty because in the first Av Chachamim it says Hareshim Mugureshes, which is not you can marry lechatchila, and in the second case it says that it's just the Vlad is kosher, but vice lechatchila you shouldn't get married with that kid. So that's a little bit of a difficulty. The kosher Rabbeinu Tam Tim Kain Pligi Ad Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Delil. Then this case here that we just mentioned would be arguing on what Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said before. The Amar Chacham Afilu Kazav El Shem Center should be here. Harezim Migureshes the Mashma Migureshes V'Sinase Lechatchila Afal Pi Shaloi Nichtav L'Shem Malchus. So Freg Tosfos, if Rashi's shot is right that this case of Rab Abba Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav is exactly the same case as what Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said earlier, why is it that there's a difference in halacha? That Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said Harezim Migureshes, meaning Lechatchila she can go remarry, but Rav said that even the Chachamim agree that you shouldn't really marry with such a get, but if you did, the Vlad would not be a mamzer. Zogt Tosfos weiter. Aval Pishloi Nichtav L'Shem Malchus. In Kain Heich Anu Koisen Begittin L'Vriyas Ha'olam. How could we ever nowadays, when we write the get, we actually write the date based on the beginning of the world, right? Tavshin Pei Gimel. We don't write, like Shmuel says, according to how many years Justin Trudeau is prime minister. I hakaimalon karav b'Surei. Do we not pass like Rav b'Surei? So we have a question if we go like Rabbi Yehuda or Shmuel, or like Rav Huna or Rav. We would pass like Rav, and according to the way Rashi understands, Rav holds it's only havlat kosher, but lechatchila you have to use the proper date on the get based on the current malchus. Yet we don't do that. How could we not do that? According to Rav Bishlam, according to Shmuel, the Chachamim say, "Afilu kosher migration means lechatchila you could use such a get." But according to Rav, who seems to say this get is only kosher b'di'eved and the children won't be possible, but you shouldn't use it. How could we use such get nowadays? Okay, I hear. Well, today also lagash b'lechatchila. I hear. U'lesvarim the garsi la'il. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kasha. And there are Svarim who are Gairis earlier that it wasn't Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, it was Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, which means they're both Rav. So then Kasha the Rav of the Rav. Then you would have a steer in Rav himself. Is it a good get lechatchila or is only Kasha b'di'eved? We would be forced to say that there's a machloikas amiroim what Rav actually held. Because of this Kasha, the besenter ha'ir kosher tfei. If you use the wrong malchus, but which wrong malchus did you use? You used instead of using the king, you used how many years the current property registrar is in power. That's not so bad. That's kosher l'chachila. Lefisha humi malchus here. At least he is some part of the administration. Aval shemalchus acheres, which is what Rabbi Yehuda Rav is talking about. Also lagarish boy ubudi ever of lat kosher. We should do Meir boy malchus choshuva for Amar. Meir holds you need the malchus choshuva. Afilu center the gara havim aggressions. Even if you use the low level person in the administration, it wouldn't be a apostle again, because at the least keeping the Moshe malchus, it's not as objectionable as a completely different malchus or other different malchus acheres. And therefore, mashanu kosh from the Bria Soila. Now that we don't use the date on the get based on the current monarchy, rather we write the Bria Soilam, Mishum the Hashta Leka Shalom Malchus, like Duvi says, now we don't have this concern anymore of Shalom Malchus Bekach, Shafilu Oivtik Achavim, Einoin Moinis Nishlois Malachim. Even Goyim don't use on their stories the amount of years that the current low-life politician is in power, rather they also use from what they call the beginning of the Common Era. In those days, and therefore they use that in the get. If he's already a king for a full year, we say he's already in the second year of his malchus. They even used that to almost exaggerate and inflate the amount of years that he was in power. Rabbi Yosy Pirish, the Achshav Eina Malchus Makpedis. Nowadays, the Malchus don't care. Ulachi loichas kvinon lishnoi samalachim in our Gittin. Teda the Rab Meir Moida, the kosher l'shem is standard to kosher shum the Ein Malchus Makpedis. Okay, developing. Rabbi Yotam had a whole different shot, and he learned the lava shalom malchus koy. Zu div Rab Meir. The second of Rab Huna Marav is not even referring to shalom malchus. That's not where we say it's only kosher b'di'evet. You know where Rav says it's only kosher b'di'evet is el haya b'mizrach v'chasav b'mayir. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about with the Sofer identified the shtar, the get, as having been written up in the wrong place. And therefore, the first case is talking about writing the wrong malchus. The second case here is talking about writing the wrong place. So that's how Tosfos wants to make a distinction between these two halachos. Zok the Gemara weiter. Kol aroyos she'amru. All of the aroyos that we're talking about that would create a heter l'shuk, that none of the women have to do yibum because one of their co-wives was an erva to the miyabim. What happens if it turns out that she was an idleness? Now all of these women, in fact, had to have done yibum. So Zok Gemara, nisu in zinu loy. What is the lashon? What is the lashon of the Mishnah? What happened with these women? It says, "Hakoyni says yivimtai or kalarai shamu tosay mutaris halchu atzaris elu v'nisu." They remarried. They have all these problems. What if they didn't remarry? What if they just had relations? Right? They had illicit relations with somebody. They were mizana, but they didn't actually remarry. Would that also create all of these sanctions? So Zok the Heilige Gemara, Kalarai Shamu Nisuin. Only if they actually married would it cause all this type of disaster. But Zinu Loi, if they were Miler Mizana, not as bad, it wouldn't be a problem. Rashi says, why? If Nisu is bad and that they did in good faith, Zinu is wrong, right? They wouldn't be allowed to. So why wouldn't we sanction them? Zokt Rashi, Zinu Loi Ein Asur Lishabim, that wouldn't ask for them. In other words, they could now go and make Yibum to the proper person, even though they were Mizana. The Nisu Chomer, it's worse if they actually remarried than if they just had Znuz. Because if they actually remarried, people aren't going to chop that they remarried wrongfully. People are going to think that if they remarried, maybe they actually received chalitza from the brother-in-law. Shema Yoimu Cholotzla, and that's why Benissus. They won't chop that they remarried because they thought their co-wife, the islands, did the yibum for them, or they thought that their co-wife was an ervine, and therefore they're part of him yibum. That's not what people will say. People will say, "Oh, she probably received chalitza, and now v'chazer l'kainta mishinish garsha, and now she got divorced from her other husband. Now she wants to go back and marry her brother-in-law." That's the problem of someone marrying a woman who you're ready to chalitza to. There's an isur lav. There's no longer an isur of Eisha Sach, but there is an isur lav of lo yibana. Therefore, only if she remarried would we say she cannot go make yibum with the person who was her brother-in-law. But if she was mazana, we would even let her make yibum. This should be proof against what the Rav Nuna said. If a shemer shavim did znus, now she's not even allowed to do yibum anymore. And you have a raya from here because our mission says nisu and not zinu. Zinu would mean that she would be able to go back and make yibum. Yet Rav Nuna said that zinu she cannot go back and do yibum. So you don't have a raya. Loi nisu buadin lazinu. Of course, our Mishnah said nisu. She's no longer allowed to go back and do yibum. But who did if she was mizana? She would not be allowed to go back and do yibum, and it's very consistent with what Rav Nuna said. So why did our Mishnah chap on the case of nisu? Why talk about a woman who had illicit relations? Talk about a woman who got married properly, at least under a right pretext. There are those who approach this from the opposite angle. The assumption is nisu and huadin lazinu. So this is a right of Rav Nuna that even Zinu would prohibit her from going back and doing Yibam. Maybe the Mishnah is Nisu Davka. Why would Davka Nisu would be a problem or not Zinu? If we allow a woman who is Nisu to remarry, to go back and marry the person who she used to Yibam with, it would be confused with the following case. It would be confused with someone whose husband went L'Medina Sayam, and they came back and told her, your husband went L'Medina Sayam and he died, and she remarried. And then what happens is, her husband comes back. There she's mutter to her husband, because of two Adam told her that her husband died. When she remarried, she's 100% an oinus, and she's allowed to go back to marry her original husband. So 1 second, so midirabanan, we don't allow her to marry her original husband, even though technically she was an oinus. Why don't we let? Because the aval gav sheba oinus, we're afraid if she goes back from her second husband, who was never legitimate, to her first husband, shema yoimru girish rishon, people will say she probably got divorced from her first husband, and that's why she married her second husband. And now, after she got divorced from her second husband, the chazar arishon vechziru la'achar gerish hashem, and that's machzik rishasai. We don't want people to think that this person was a machzik rishasai. Therefore, we say don't marry. This is not a machzik rishasai. This is a case with a death, but it could be confused with that, and therefore we wouldn't allow her to go back and marry the other. You were going to say something? Then she would be mutter. That's 100% honest. That's right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because it's called an honest. If somebody was koines his yavam. So here is the second case of a woman who thought she was not mechuyev in yibum. She really was, and she got messed up. Right. The first case was she thought that her co-wife was an erva to the miyabim, and in the second case, she actually did yibum. One of her co-wives did yibum, and therefore she thought she's free and clear. So why do we need two examples of the same case? I thought I was not mechuyev in yibum, and in fact I was. Yes, if we only know the case where she thought that her sister, her co-wife, was an erva, and that's why she goes free, there I would say she's messed up. Because the mitzvah of yibum was not niskayim at all. Therefore, when it turns out that in fact she remarried but no yibum was done, we sanctioned her. In the case where one of the wives did yibum, so what do you want from her? I actually did my due diligence. I made sure that one of my co-wives did yibum. Maybe I shouldn't be sanctioned. Kamash Malon didn't even he get sanctioned. But if you only knew the case where her sister, where her co-wife got married, only there we sanctioned. I would think the karami kameh. She knew. I guess Rashi says. I guess you know when your co-wife doesn't have simonim. They must have seen each other not dressed. So she knew that this woman could possibly be an idleness, and this might happen, and she should have waited to make sure that this woman becomes an adult. But in the case where she thinks that it's a tzaras ha'erba, maybe you wouldn't sanction tzricha, you sanction anyway. The sofer was a batlin. He gave the wrong document to the wrong person. Rabbi Lazar said, "Im la'alter yotza." If right away they found it, then you say there's not megureshes. But if it happened after a time, then maybe they're making a scam in between them to mess up the second husband. What's called right away and what's called after a little period of time? If they're still at the table in this negotiation, in this scenario, they didn't leave the table. The moment they got up, even if right outside they went, like the Meshulach, as soon as he leaves your house, he opens up the envelope to see what check you gave him, right? That's already too late. You can't go back in for more. Until she gets married, that's l'alter. So until she gets married, if she discovers that she didn't get a get and there was this mix-up, she's not allowed to remarry. But Nizis, the moment she remarries, there we're going to assume it's a kanunya, and we're not going to passel again. Zeulachazman. Tonight we learned the end of the permission is Rabbi Lazar stating, "Lekali menu min arisha in la'abitz chusa shosheini." That it depends on if she remarried or not. Hani de katani sheni. That's why there's a second husband here, because once she's remarried, we don't passel again. She wasn't remarried yet. She just got up from the table and walked out of the house. What do you mean he's messing up the second husband? How could she possibly be married to a second husband if she just walked out of the house? And for the Gemara, it just means once she's already given the right to remarry, we don't take it away from her. Before she actually walked out with the right to remarry, then we'll take it away from her. But if she already got a right to remarry, then you don't take it away from her. Okay, we'll stop here. Be'ez Hashem will be mamshech tomorrow.